I was staring at my coffee machine, waiting for it to finish brewing, when someone started pounding on my front door like they were trying to break it down. It was 7 in the morning on a Tuesday, and I had exactly 20 minutes before my first video call with a client in Seattle. My home office was set up perfectly in what used to be the garage of my townhouse in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I had been working from home as a freelance graphic designer for the past 3 years without a single problem. Until now, apparently. I opened the door to find a woman in her mid-40s with blonde hair cut in that aggressive bob that screamed middle management. She was wearing a bright pink blazer despite the humid North Carolina heat, and she was clutching a leather folder like it contained nuclear launch codes. "Zachary Garrison," she demanded, not asked. "That's me," I said, already feeling exhausted. "Can I help you?" "I'm Patricia Mansfield, Vice President of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. We need to discuss your property immediately." I blinked. "My property, what about it?" She pushed past me into my entryway without invitation, her heels clicking on my hardwood floors. "Mr. Garrison, it has come to our attention that you are operating a commercial business from this residence." "I'm a freelance graphic designer. I work from home. Lots of people do that." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line that somehow made her look like she had just bitten into a lemon. "That may be, but your property is zoned mixed use, which means you are required to pay commercial HOA rates, not residential rates." I stared at her. "What? That doesn't make any sense." "This is a residential townhouse. I live here." "The zoning is mixed use," she repeated, as if speaking to a child, "which means the property can be used for both residential and commercial purposes. Since you are conducting business here, you must pay commercial rates. That's an additional $800 per month." My coffee was getting cold on the counter. My client call was in 17 minutes, and this woman was telling me I owed the HOA an extra $9,600 a year because I used a computer in my house. "Let me see the documentation," I said. Patricia opened her leather folder with the flourish of a magician revealing a card trick. She pulled out a stack of papers and pointed to a highlighted section. "Right here, mixed-use zoning. Article 7, Section 12 of the HOA bylaws states that any property zoned mixed-use conducting commercial operations must pay the commercial rate." I scanned the document. The zoning designation was there, clear as day. My townhouse, along with apparently 6 others in my row, was listed as mixed use. But the commercial rate section seemed to be talking about actual commercial properties, like the coffee shop 2 blocks over or the dentist office on the corner. "This is insane," I said. "I'm not running a storefront. I don't have customers coming to my house. I just work on my computer." "The law is the law, Mr. Garrison. We expect the first payment by the end of this month, along with back payments for the past 3 years. That comes to $34,800. The number hit me like a physical blow. $34,000. You're out of your mind. Patricia's expression didn't change. You signed the HOA agreement when you purchased this property. Ignorance of the bylaws is not an excuse. If you refuse to pay, we will place a lien on your property and begin foreclosure proceedings." She left her business card on my entry table and walked out, leaving my front door wide open. I stood there in my pajama pants and old college t-shirt, holding a stack of papers that threatened to bankrupt me, while my coffee got cold and my client call approached. I called my best friend Marcus as soon as Patricia left. He was a real estate attorney, though he specialized in commercial properties, not HOA disputes. Still, he knew more about this stuff than I did. "Zach, slow down," Marcus said over the phone. "Start from the beginning." I explained the whole situation while pulling up my property records on my computer. I had bought this townhouse 4 years ago, right after I decided to go freelance. It was a modest 2-bedroom in the Willow Creek development, a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and a small park in the center. The HOA fees had been reasonable, $250 a month, which covered landscaping, the community pool, and maintenance of common areas. "Okay," Marcus said after I finished. "First thing, pull up your original purchase documents. Check what the zoning was listed as when you bought it." I dug through my filing cabinet while Marcus waited on the line. I found the folder from the closing and flipped through page after page of legal documents until I found the property description. "It says zoned R2, residential," I read aloud. "And what does the current zoning say?" I pulled up the county website and searched for my address. It says, "Mixed-use commercial residential." Marcus was quiet for a moment. When did it change? That was the question, wasn't it? I searched through the county records, clicking through page after page of bureaucratic documentation. Finally, I found it. The zoning had been changed 18 months ago, part of a broader rezoning initiative for the neighborhood. The stated purpose was to allow small businesses like home-based bakeries or consulting offices to operate legally within the residential area. 18 months ago, I told Marcus. Some kind of neighborhood revitalization initiative. Did you receive notice of the zoning change? I don't think so. Let me check my mail. I kept a box of old mail and documents in my closet, the boring official stuff that might be important later. I dug through it while Marcus waited. "I don't see anything." "They're required to notify property owners of zoning changes," Marcus said, "but that's a separate issue. The real problem is whether the HOA can actually charge you commercial rates just because you work from home." "Can they?" "Maybe. It depends on how the bylaws are written and what the local laws say. You need to read through your entire HOA agreement, every single page, and you need to find out if anyone else in the neighborhood is being charged these rates." I thanked Marcus and spent the rest of the morning canceling my client calls. This was too important to put off. I pulled up the HOA bylaws online and started reading. They were 73 pages of dense legal language that made my eyes cross, but I forced myself through every word. The section Patricia had referenced was indeed there. Article 7, Section 12 stated that properties zoned for commercial use or mixed use conducting commercial operations were subject to commercial HOA rates. But there was a lot of ambiguity in what constituted commercial operations. Did working from home count? What about someone who sold crafts on Etsy as a hobby? What about a teacher who graded papers at home? I needed to talk to my neighbors. The Willow Creek development had about 200 townhouses and single-family homes. My row of townhouses had 8 units, and according to Patricia's documents, 7 of them were zoned mixed use. I started with my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Chen, a retired librarian who had lived there for a decade. She answered her door in a gardening apron, dirt on her hands. "Zachary, hello. What can I do for you, Mrs. Chen? Have you heard anything from the HOA about paying commercial rates?" Her pleasant expression darkened. "Oh, that woman. Yes, she came by last week. I told her exactly where she could put her commercial rates." I couldn't help but smile. Mrs. Chen was 70 years old and looked like someone's sweet grandmother, but she had a spine of steel. "What did she say?" "She said I was running a commercial operation because I sell vegetables from my garden at the farmer's market. I make maybe $200 a year, Zachary. It's not even enough to cover the cost of seeds." I told her she was being ridiculous. "Did she threaten you?" "She said she would put a lien on my property if I didn't pay." I told her to go ahead and try. "My nephew is a lawyer and he'll bury her in paperwork." I talked to 4 more neighbors that afternoon. Two of them had received similar visits from Patricia. One was a photographer who took occasional wedding photos on weekends. The other was a consultant who worked from home 3 days a week. Both had been threatened with liens and foreclosure. Both had refused to pay. The other two neighbors hadn't been contacted, but when I asked about their work situations, they both had traditional jobs where they left the house every day. They weren't being targeted. This was a pattern. Patricia and the HOA were going after anyone who worked from home, regardless of whether they actually ran a commercial business. I called an emergency meeting with the affected neighbors that evening. We gathered in Mrs. Chen's living room, 6 of us total, all facing the same threat. "This is extortion," said Derek Thompson, the photographer. He was a tall guy in his 30s with perpetually messy hair. "They're trying to squeeze money out of us for doing nothing wrong. The question is whether they have legal standing," I said. "Marcus thinks the bylaws might be on their side, technically, but there could be a difference between the letter of the law and the spirit of it." "What does that mean for us?" asked Nina Patel, the consultant. She was a sharp woman in her 40s who worked for a tech company remotely. "It means we need a lawyer who specializes in HOA disputes, and we need to fight this together. If we all refuse to pay and present a united front, it's harder for them to pick us off one by one." Mrs. Chen nodded. "I'm in. I've dealt with bullies before, and that's all this Patricia woman is." A bully with a clipboard. Everyone agreed. We would split the cost of a lawyer and fight this as a group. Finding an HOA attorney in Charlotte wasn't hard. There were dozens of them. Finding one who would take on our case with enthusiasm was harder. The first 3 I called listened to my story and politely declined. HOA disputes were messy, they said. Time-consuming. Often not worth the effort. The 4th attorney I called was different. "They're trying to charge you what?" Samantha Holloway said over the phone, her voice sharp with interest. "That's the most creative scam I've heard all month." I liked her immediately. We met at her office the next day, all 6 of us crammed into her conference room. Samantha was in her early 50s, with short gray hair and glasses that she kept pushing up her nose. She had a stack of legal books on her desk and a coffee mug that said, "I object," in bold letters. "Here's the situation," she said after we explained everything. "The HOA is technically correct that your properties are zoned mixed use. However, there's a significant legal question about whether working from home constitutes commercial operations under the HOA bylaws. Most courts have ruled that home-based work, especially in the modern telecommuting environment, does not convert a residential property into a commercial one." "So we have a case?" Derek asked. "You have a case, a good one, but I need to be honest with you. HOA disputes can drag on for months or even years. They're expensive. And even if you win, the HOA might try other tactics to make your lives difficult." "What kind of tactics?" Nina asked. "Harassment. Frivolous fines for minor violations, making it difficult for you to use community amenities. HOAs have a lot of power, and when they're run by vindictive people, they can make your life hell." "So what do we do?" I asked. Samantha smiled. "We fight smart. First, I'm going to file a response to their demand, stating that you dispute the charges and consider them invalid. Second, I'm going to request all documentation related to the zoning change and how the HOA determined that your properties were subject to commercial rates. Third, I'm going to look for any procedural violations in how they implemented this policy." "Procedural violations?" Mrs. Chen asked. "HOAs are required to follow their own rules. If they didn't properly notify the community about this policy change, or if they didn't vote on it according to their bylaws, then it could be invalid. We need to find their weak points and exploit them." We hired Samantha on the spot. The next week, Patricia showed up at my door again. This time, she had backup. A tall man in an ill-fitting suit stood behind her, holding a clipboard of his own. Patricia's smile was so fake it looked painful. "Mr. Garrison, this is Robert Chen, president of the Willow Creek HOA. We're here to discuss your continued refusal to pay the commercial rates." "I have nothing to discuss," I said. "My attorney has already sent you a response. All communication should go through her." Robert stepped forward. He had the kind of face that looked like it had never smiled genuinely in its life. "Mr. Garrison, we don't want this to become adversarial. We're simply enforcing the rules that all residents agreed to follow. The rules that you're misinterpreting to extract money from people working from home during a time when remote work is standard across the country. Those rules," Patricia's fake smile vanished. "Your property is zoned mixed use. You are conducting commercial operations. Therefore, you pay commercial rates. It's very simple." "Then you'll have no problem explaining that to a judge." Robert's expression hardened. "We were hoping to resolve this amicably. However, if you insist on being difficult, we will have no choice but to pursue all legal remedies available to us, including liens, foreclosure, and fines for non-compliance." "Do what you need to do," I said, and closed the door. My hands were shaking. I had never been a confrontational person. I preferred to solve problems through compromise and discussion. But something about Patricia's entitled attitude and Robert's threats made my blood boil. They were trying to bully me out of thousands of dollars for doing absolutely nothing wrong. Samantha called me that afternoon. I got their response to my request for documentation. "You're going to want to sit down for this." "What did you find?" "The zoning change 18 months ago was legitimate. The county approved it as part of a neighborhood business initiative. However, the HOA never formally adopted a policy about charging commercial rates to residents who work from home. The bylaw they're citing was written 20 years ago and was intended for actual commercial properties, like if someone converted their house into a hair salon or a law office. So they're applying an old rule to a new situation." "Exactly. And here's the kicker. There's no record of the HOA board voting to apply this rule to work-from-home residents. Patricia and Robert appear to have decided this on their own, without board approval or community input." "Can they do that?" "No. The HOA bylaws require a board vote for any new fee assessments. If they didn't vote on it, the fees are invalid." I felt a surge of hope. "So we can beat this. We can try. I'm drafting a formal complaint and we're going to request an emergency board meeting. Under North Carolina law, HOA members have the right to call for a meeting if they have a legitimate grievance. We're going to force them to explain their reasoning in front of the entire community." The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks later, on a Thursday evening at the community center. In the meantime, Patricia and Robert escalated their campaign against us. First came the fines. I received a notice that my trash cans were visible from the street, a violation of HOA rules. Fine, $100. Never mind that everyone's trash cans were visible on trash day. Then I got another notice that my mailbox needed repainting. Fine, $150. The mailbox had been the same color for 4 years without complaint. Derek got fined for parking his work van in his driveway overnight. Mrs. Chen got fined for having a garden gnome that was not in keeping with the aesthetic standards of the community. Nina got fined for having her porch light on past 10 p.m. It was transparent harassment, but it was also effective at being annoying and stressful. "They're trying to break you down," Samantha explained over the phone. "They want you to give up and pay rather than deal with the constant hassle. Don't give in. Document everything. Take photos, keep records of all communications. If they cross a line, we'll add harassment to our complaint. The Thursday of the emergency board meeting arrived. The community center was packed. Word had spread through the neighborhood about the dispute, and apparently, a lot of people were interested in what the HOA was up to. The room had about 80 people in it, far more than usually attended these meetings. Patricia and Robert sat at a table at the front of the room, along with 3 other board members I didn't recognize. They all looked uncomfortable with the turnout. Samantha stood up to present our case. She was calm and professional, laying out the facts in clear, simple language. She explained the zoning change, the HOA's attempt to charge commercial rates, and the lack of proper procedure in implementing the new fees. "The question before this board is simple," Samantha said. "Can the HOA charge residents commercial rates simply because they work from home? And did the board follow proper procedure in making this decision?" The answer to both questions is no. Patricia stood up, her face flushed. "We are simply enforcing the bylaws that every resident agreed to when they moved here. These properties are zoned mixed use. The bylaws clearly state that mixed-use properties conducting commercial operations pay commercial rates." "What defines commercial operations?" Samantha asked. "Business activities conducted on the property." "So if I grade papers at home as a teacher, is that commercial operations? If I answer work emails on my laptop, is that commercial operations? If I write a novel in my spare time and eventually publish it, is that commercial operations?" Patricia hesitated. "That's different." "How is it different? These residents are running full-time businesses from their homes." "Mr. Garrison is a freelance graphic designer who works on his computer. He has no employees, no clients visiting the property, no signage, no inventory. His work is indistinguishable from any other remote worker in America." "Are you planning to charge commercial rates to every single person who works from home?" the crowd murmured. A lot of people worked from home, at least occasionally. This could affect anyone. Robert stood up. "The board has the authority to interpret and enforce the bylaws as we see fit." "Actually, you don't," Samantha said. She pulled out a copy of the HOA bylaws. Article 3, Section 8 states that any new fee assessments require a vote of the full board, followed by notice to the membership and an opportunity for comment. "Did you follow that procedure?" Silence. "I'll take that as a no," Samantha continued. "Which means these commercial rates you're trying to charge are invalid. You didn't follow your own rules." The room erupted in conversation. People were talking over each other, some angry, some confused. Robert banged a gavel on the table, trying to restore order. "This meeting is out of order," he shouted. "We will not be bullied by grandstanding lawyers and troublemakers who refuse to follow the rules." "Then follow your own rules," someone shouted from the back. I turned and saw it was Bill Martinez, a retired veteran who lived 3 streets over. "I didn't move here to watch the board make up fees without telling anyone." More people voiced their agreement. The board looked panicked. Patricia stood up, her voice shrill. "If you people don't like how we run things, you can leave. Or you can run for the board yourselves. Until then, we have the authority to manage this community as we see fit." "Actually," Samantha said quietly, "the members have the authority. The board serves at the pleasure of the membership. And under Article 4, Section 2, the members can call for a vote of no confidence in the board if 50% of the membership signs a petition." Patricia's face went white. After the meeting, people crowded around us, asking questions, offering support. By the end of the evening, we had signatures from over 100 residents on a petition calling for a vote of no confidence in the current board. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Samantha filed formal complaints with the county about the HOA's improper procedures. We organized the neighborhood, holding meetings and spreading information about what was really happening. It turned out that Patricia and Robert had been running the HOA like their personal fiefdom for years, making decisions without input, awarding contracts to their friends, and generally abusing their power. The commercial rate scheme was just the most recent example. The vote of no confidence was scheduled for 6 weeks after the emergency meeting. In the meantime, Patricia and Robert doubled down. They sent threatening letters to everyone who had signed the petition. They hired a law firm to fight back against our complaints. They even tried to invalidate the petition on technical grounds, claiming some of the signatures weren't properly notarized. It was exhausting. I was spending more time dealing with HOA drama than actually working. My client projects were falling behind. My stress levels were through the roof. More than once, I considered just paying the damn fees to make it all go away. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered Mrs. Chen standing in her garden, dirt on her hands, telling Patricia where she could put her commercial rates. I remembered Derek's determination and Nina's quiet strength. We were in this together, and we were fighting for something important. The day of the vote arrived. It was a Saturday morning, bright and sunny, at the community center. Nearly every resident of Willow Creek showed up. The parking lot was overflowing and people had to park on the street. The vote was by secret ballot. Each household got one vote. The question was simple. Did the membership have confidence in the current board, yes or no? It took 2 hours to count all the ballots. Samantha and I stood outside in the parking lot, too nervous to sit still. "However this goes," Samantha said, "you've already won something important. You stood up for yourself. You organized your community. That matters." "I just want my normal life back," I said. Sometimes standing up for your normal life means fighting for it. Finally, they called us back inside. Robert stood at the front of the room, his face like stone. He read the results in a monotone voice. "The vote is complete. No confidence. 172 votes. Confidence. 31 votes. The current board is hereby dissolved, effective immediately. A new election will be held in 30 days. The room erupted in applause. Patricia stood up and stormed out without a word, her heels clicking furiously on the floor. Robert gathered his papers and left more slowly, his shoulders slumped. We had won, but the fight wasn't over yet. With the old board gone, we needed to elect a new one. And we needed to make sure the new board would actually follow the rules and serve the community, not their own interests. I hadn't planned on running for the board. I was a graphic designer, not a politician. But when Mrs. Chen nominated me at the next meeting and the room full of people applauded, I couldn't say no. The election was a month later. I ran for president, along with 2 other candidates. One was Bill Martinez, the retired veteran. The other was a woman named Carol Simpson who had lived in the neighborhood for 15 years and had always been involved in community activities. We each gave speeches at a candidates forum. Bill talked about accountability and transparency. Carol talked about maintaining property values and community standards. I talked about fairness and following the rules, about making sure the HOA served the residents, not the other way around. The vote was close. Bill got 47 votes. Carol got 62 votes. I got 98 votes. I was the new HOA president. The first board meeting under the new administration was a week later. We had a completely new board, me as president, Mrs. Chen as vice president, Derek as treasurer, and 4 other community members in various roles. Our first order of business was to formally rescind the commercial rate fees. All in favor of declaring the commercial rate assessments invalid and refunding any payments made under that policy. I said. Aye, everyone said in unison. It was unanimous. Our second order of business was to review all the harassment fines that Patricia and Robert had issued. We threw out every single one of them. Derek's parking ticket, Mrs. Chen's garden gnome citation, my mailbox violation, all gone. Our third order of business was to establish clear procedures for how the board would operate going forward. Every decision would require a vote. Every major policy change would require community input. Financial records would be published quarterly for all residents to review. We were going to run this HOA the right way, but we weren't done with Patricia and Robert yet. Samantha called me 2 weeks after the new board took over. Zach, you need to hear this. I've been going through the HOA's financial records, and there are some serious irregularities. What kind of irregularities? The kind that might be criminal. She came to my house that evening with a box full of documents. We spread them out on my dining room table, and she walked me through what she had found. For the past 3 years, Patricia and Robert had been awarding contracts for community maintenance to a company called Premier Property Services. Landscaping, pool maintenance, repairs, everything went to Premier. The HOA had paid Premier over $200,000 in that time. The problem was that Premier Property Services was owned by Robert's brother-in-law. That's a conflict of interest, Samantha explained. But it gets worse. I compared the rates Premier was charging to market rates for similar services. They were charging about 40% more than they should have been. The HOA was being massively overcharged, and Robert was funneling money to his family. That's fraud, I said. Yes, it is, and there's more. Remember those commercial rate fees they were trying to charge you? I think that was their next scheme. They were going to pocket that money or use it to pay inflated bills to Premier, which would then kick some of it back to them. I felt sick. We need to report this. I already did. I contacted the district attorney's office this afternoon. They're opening an investigation. The investigation moved quickly. The DA's office subpoenaed records from Premier Property Services and from Robert's personal bank accounts. They found evidence of kickbacks, inflated billing, and misappropriation of HOA funds. Patricia was involved too, having signed off on all the contracts and payments to Premier, despite knowing about Robert's family connection. 3 months after the vote of no confidence, Patricia Mansfield and Robert Chen were arrested and charged with fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The local news covered the story, and it became a minor scandal in Charlotte. HOA leaders arrested in fraud scheme. Read the headline in the Charlotte Observer. The trial took almost a year. Samantha helped coordinate with the DA's office, providing evidence and testimony from HOA members. I had to testify about the commercial rate scheme and how Patricia and Robert had tried to intimidate us into paying. In the end, both Patricia and Robert were convicted. Robert got 3 years in prison and was ordered to pay restitution of over $150,000. Patricia got 18 months and $50,000 in restitution. Premier Property Services was shut down, and Robert's brother-in-law was charged as an accomplice. Justice had been served. Life in Willow Creek slowly returned to normal after that. The new board worked well together, making decisions transparently and fairly. We hired a new property management company to handle maintenance, one that charged reasonable rates and didn't have any family connections to board members. We established a reserve fund for future repairs and improvements, something the old board had never bothered with. My graphic design business actually benefited from all the drama. The publicity around the HOA case had made me somewhat known in the Charlotte area, and several local businesses reached out to hire me. I ended up growing my client base significantly and even hired a part-time assistant to help with the workload. Mrs. Chen expanded her garden and continued selling vegetables at the farmer's market, making her $200 a year without any harassment from anyone. Derek's photography business was thriving. Nina got promoted at her tech company and was working from home full-time now, without anyone questioning whether that constituted commercial operations. The whole experience taught me something important about standing up for yourself. For most of my life, I had avoided conflict. I didn't like confrontation. I preferred to go along to get along, to find the path of least resistance. But sometimes, the path of least resistance leads you straight to being taken advantage of. When Patricia showed up at my door demanding tens of thousands of dollars for the crime of working from home, I could have just paid it. I could have refinanced my mortgage or taken out a loan or dipped into my retirement savings. It would have been easier in the short term. But it would have been wrong. Fighting back was hard. It was stressful and expensive and time-consuming. But it was also necessary, not just for me, but for all my neighbors who were facing the same bullying tactics. And in the end, we didn't just win our individual fight. We exposed corruption, we reformed the HOA, and we made the community better for everyone. A year after Patricia's first visit to my door, I was sitting in my home office, working on a logo design for a new restaurant downtown, when I heard a knock. My heart did a little skip, a Pavlovian response to the memory of that morning when everything started. But it wasn't Patricia. It was Mrs. Chen, holding a basket of fresh tomatoes from her garden. "I thought you might like these," she said with a smile. "They came out beautifully this year." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. They look amazing." "You know, Zachary, I've been thinking. Before all this happened, I didn't really know my neighbors. I kept to myself, tended my garden, lived my quiet life. But this whole fight, as terrible as it was, it brought us together. It made us a real community." She was right. Before the commercial rate fiasco, I had barely known anyone in the neighborhood beyond a polite wave when I checked the mail. Now I knew dozens of people. We had cookouts in the park. We helped each other with projects. We actually cared about what happened in our community because we had fought for it together. "Maybe that's Patricia's legacy," I said. "She tried to tear us apart and extort us, and instead she brought us together." Mrs. Chen laughed. "I don't think that's quite what she had in mind. But I'll take it." After she left, I returned to my work, the afternoon sun streaming through my window, the taste of fresh coffee on my lips, the quiet hum of my computer filling the home office I had fought so hard to keep. This was my space, my home, my business. And no one was going to take it from me with bogus fees and intimidation tactics. The new HOA board met once a month now, always in the evening, always open to any residents who wanted to attend. Attendance was usually pretty good. People cared now. They paid attention. They asked questions. That was healthy. At one of our meetings, about 18 months after taking office, a new resident raised his hand during the open forum section. He had just moved in 2 weeks earlier, a young guy fresh out of college who worked in IT. "I have a question about the mixed-use zoning," he said nervously. "I work from home full-time. Do I need to pay any special fees?" The room went quiet. A few people chuckled, remembering. "No," I said firmly. "You don't pay any special fees for working from home. You pay the standard residential HOA rate, same as everyone else. Working from home is normal. It's not a commercial operation unless you're running an actual business with clients coming to your house, employees, signage, that sort of thing. You're fine." The relief on his face was visible. "Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure. The zoning designation made me nervous." "I understand completely," I said, "but that's not how we do things here anymore. This HOA exists to serve the residents and maintain the community, not to nickel and dime people or make up arbitrary fees. If you ever have concerns, my door is always open. Literally, I live 3 streets over in the townhouses. After the meeting, the young guy came up to me and shook my hand. "Thank you for being reasonable. I've heard horror stories about HOAs, and I was worried when I saw this neighborhood had one." "We've had our issues," I admitted, "but we're working hard to do better. Welcome to Willow Creek." As I drove home that night, I thought about how much had changed. 2 years ago, I had been a quiet freelancer just trying to mind my own business and do my work. Now, I was HOA president, a position I never wanted or expected. But it was also a position I had grown into and even started to enjoy. There was something satisfying about helping solve problems, about making decisions that improved people's lives, about being part of something larger than myself. The old Zach would have run from that responsibility. The new Zach embraced it. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. It was Samantha. "Hey, Zach, I hope I'm not calling too late." "Not at all. What's up?" "I wanted to give you a heads up. Patricia is being released from prison next month." She served her full 18-month sentence. My stomach tightened. Is that going to be a problem? I don't think so. As part of her sentence, she's prohibited from serving on any HOA board for 10 years, and she's required to stay away from Willow Creek as a condition of her probation. But I wanted you to know just in case. Thanks for telling me. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a few minutes processing. Patricia was getting out. The person who had started this whole nightmare was going to be free again, but she couldn't come here. She couldn't hurt us anymore. Her power was gone, stripped away by her own greed and corruption. I wondered if she had learned anything from the experience. Probably not. People like Patricia rarely did. They always believed they were entitled to whatever they could take, and when they got caught, they blamed everyone but themselves. But that wasn't my problem anymore. My problem was finishing the logo design for the restaurant, preparing for next month's HOA board meeting, and deciding what to make for dinner. Normal problems. Good problems. The seasons changed, and life went on. My business continued to grow. I hired another assistant and had to rent a small office space downtown for them to work, since my home office was only big enough for me. The irony wasn't lost on me that I now actually did have a commercial operation separate from my residence, something Patricia had falsely accused me of years earlier. Derek and I became good friends. We collaborated on projects sometimes, with me doing design work and him doing photography for local businesses. Mrs. Chen taught a gardening class at the community center on weekends, and it was always packed. Nina ended up moving to a bigger house in the neighborhood when she and her husband had a baby. The Willow Creek HOA became something of a model in the Charlotte area for how to run a homeowners association properly. We were transparent, fair, and responsive to residents. Other HOAs started reaching out to ask how we did things, what policies we had implemented, how we avoided the conflicts and corruption that plagued so many associations. I always told them the same thing: follow your own rules, treat residents with respect, and remember that you're serving the community, not ruling it. Simple principles, but apparently revolutionary in the world of HOAs. 3 years after Patricia's first visit to my door, I decided not to run for re-election as HOA president. It was time. I had served 3 terms, helped reform the organization, and established policies that would outlast my tenure. Someone else deserved a chance to lead. Bill Martinez, the retired veteran, ran unopposed and won easily. At his first meeting as president, he thanked me for my service and presented me with a plaque that read, "To Zachary Garrison, who stood up when it mattered." I hung it in my home office, right next to my desk where I could see it every day. Looking back on everything that happened, from that first angry knock on my door to the trials to the reforms to the slow rebuilding of community trust, I realized that the whole experience had fundamentally changed me. I wasn't the same person I had been before. I was stronger, more confident, more willing to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult. Patricia Mansfield had tried to extort me with her bogus commercial rate fees. She had threatened my home, my livelihood, my peace of mind. She had thought I would be an easy target, someone who would fold under pressure and hand over the money rather than fight. She had been wrong. And in being wrong, in pushing too hard and revealing her own corruption, she had accidentally created something better than what existed before. The fight against her had united the neighborhood. It had exposed systemic problems in how the HOA operated. It had forced all of us to pay attention and get involved and demand better. Sometimes the worst experiences lead to the best outcomes. Not because the experiences themselves are good, but because they force us to grow and change and become stronger versions of ourselves. I still work from home most days, sitting in my converted garage office, designing logos and websites and marketing materials for clients across the country. Sometimes I hear a knock on my door, and for just a second, my heart rate spikes. But it's never Patricia. It's never another HOA board member demanding payment for imaginary commercial operations. It's usually just a neighbor stopping by to chat, or a delivery person dropping off a package, or kids selling cookies for a school fundraiser. Normal things, safe things, the things that make up a life lived in peace. The mixed-use zoning is still there, listed on my property records. The county never changed it back, but it doesn't matter anymore. Everyone understands that zoning designation doesn't determine HOA fees. Actual property use does, and working from home is residential use, period. The bylaws were amended to make that crystal clear, with specific language protecting remote workers from discriminatory fee assessments. It passed with near unanimous support from the membership. No one wanted to repeat the mistakes of the past. On the 5th anniversary of Patricia's first visit, I threw a small party at my house. Just close friends and the people who had fought alongside me during those difficult months. Mrs. Chen brought vegetables from her garden. Derek brought his camera and took candid shots of everyone laughing and talking. Nina brought her daughter, who was now a rambunctious 3-year-old running around my backyard. We didn't really talk about the case or the trial or any of the drama. We had all moved on. But the shared experience was there, underneath everything, the foundation of genuine friendship and community that had been forged in adversity. As the sun set and people started heading home, Mrs. Chen pulled me aside. "You know what I realized today," she said. "What's that?" "We won. Not just in court or in the HOA elections. We actually won. Look at this community. Look at how people care about each other now. That's real victory." She was right, of course. The real victory wasn't defeating Patricia and Robert, though that had been necessary. The real victory was building something better in the aftermath. Creating a community where people felt safe and respected. Establishing an HOA that actually served its purpose without becoming a petty tyranny. That night, after everyone left, I sat on my back porch with a beer and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, Patricia was living her life, probably still bitter about how things had turned out. Robert was maybe still in prison, serving out the last of his sentence. Their corruption had been exposed, their scheme had failed, and they had paid the price. But I wasn't thinking about them anymore. They were part of my past, a chapter that had closed. My present and future were here, in this house, in this neighborhood, in this community that we had all built together. The journey from that first knock on my door to this quiet evening on my porch had been long and difficult. There had been moments when I wanted to give up, when the stress felt overwhelming, when paying the bogus fees seemed easier than fighting. But I hadn't given up. We hadn't given up, and that made all the difference. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, my lawyer friend who had helped me at the very beginning. "Saw your Facebook post about the anniversary party. Glad everything worked out, man. You did good." I smiled and texted back, "We all did good. Thanks for the advice way back when." Anytime. That's what friends are for. I finished my beer and went inside, locking the door behind me. Tomorrow I had a client presentation, an HOA board meeting to attend as a regular member, and a neighborhood cleanup day to help organize. Normal responsibilities. Good responsibilities. The nightmare of commercial rate fees and HOA corruption was long over. Justice had been served. The community was thriving. And I was home, exactly where I belonged, working from my office without anyone questioning my right to do so. Patricia had demanded I pay commercial rates because my property was zoned mixed use. She had threatened foreclosure and liens and financial ruin. She had tried to use the power of the HOA to extort money from residents who were doing nothing wrong. Instead, she had lost everything. Her position, her freedom, her reputation. And we had gained something far more valuable, a real community, built on fairness and respect and the willingness to stand up for what was right. In the end, that was the real story. Not about HOA fees or zoning disputes or legal technicalities. It was about ordinary people finding the courage to fight back against injustice, and in doing so, discovering that they were capable of far more than they ever imagined. I turned off the lights and headed to bed, tired but content. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments both big and small. But whatever came, I knew I could handle it, because I had already faced down the worst and come out stronger on the other side. The battle was over. The war was won. And life, finally, beautifully, was back to normal.